Hi, I'm Professor Green, and we'll be talking about now part 2 of Chapter 11, the role of technology. Let's get started here with mobile telephones. So the next few slides will talk about the increase in mobile telephone use for purchases. This was definitely a hot topic a handful of years ago, and probably when the textbook was being published. And so we'll still go through it, but most of it should be quite familiar to you. So on this slide, they say that we use radio technology to enable users to place calls from a mobile device with transmission over a service area divided into small cells, and each with its own low power radio transmitter. So that's the idea behind a cell phone. But most importantly, for business majors, what we want to be talking about is m-commerce. This is how via mobile or cell phones, we're allowing consumers to use their mobile phones as an electronic wallet. Again, much more familiar to those of you who are in school now, as opposed to people who were in school maybe 5 or 6 years ago. The next 3 slides have graphs from the textbook that walk us through how this is changing. Here in figure 11.4, the first section of 11.4, this is mobile payment usage by purchase. So people are using their phone to pay for an actual physical product like a shirt or another phone or a CD or something. And then they also use their phone to pay for apps that they want to download, digital content, if you're going to be streaming a video or some music content. And slowly but surely, we're seeing more and more people pay for food and drink via their phone and a particular service that the book goes into this whole description about KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, China, and how that's becoming more and more mainstream to use their app or their phone to pay for food or drink. We'll talk about that more in 2 slides. And then a service here, I think that, again, is so popular these days with Venmo, right? You see so often that people are paying for yoga, massage, different things on their Venmo app that that they would normally pay with cash or with a credit card. Here we talk about mobile commerce usage in the last 6 months by country. And you'll see that in China, obviously, they have so many people that they use their mobile phones a lot for mobile purchasing. Nigeria, I thought that was super interesting that they are far ahead of many countries when we talk about purchasing via their phone, even though in the last part of this chapter, we talked about how Nigeria and some parts of the country, the internet access is just so limited. So interesting to hear about this. South Africa seems to be far ahead, and no surprise to India is doing quite well, right, when it comes to mobile purchasing. United States here, the UK, if you ever go to the UK, right, they're just a little bit farther advanced than we are here in the US when it comes to technology. And then globally, where everybody is, we're ahead of the world in general. And then we have Germany, Brazil, France that are on that's on this graph. This last piece, again, figure 11.4, but the third part of this figure goes into how we make these mobile payments. And I thought this was interesting because I think here in the US, we still primarily are still typing our credit card or debit card information into a mobile website, right? That I still feel like either my iPhone saves that information, or I manually type it in each time. Not very often do I directly to a mobile phone bill. That's still somewhat new to us, or we can make a payment via an app, right? That's like a Venmo thing. And then via mobile wallet, that's Apple Pay. Apple Pay's been around for a long time, but I have to say, I don't see it very often, or I don't use it personally very often. And then an airtime transfer. We don't have that very often here in the United States, even though in Europe it's becoming more and more popular. Social networking. So let's hop into this topic again, which is so familiar to you all, but let's talk about it from an ethical and a business and society point of view. Social networking is a system using technology to enable people to connect, explore interests, and share activities around the world. It exploded onto the technology scene in the early 2000s, altering many social and human interactions, and it raises additional responsibilities to ensure that the interactions are really ethical and socially beneficial. And again, we could have a whole course designed around social networking and ethics. Let's get into a few of the hot topics. Here is a graph with Americans who have a social profile, right? As you can see, it's going up, 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 right? Even your grandmother most times these days has a social profile. So what are some of the ethical challenges involving technology? The first and one of the biggest ones is a loss of privacy. The first bullet point here says that individuals are under a technology microscope with vast amount of data collected each minute and available to be analyzed in great detail. And so we've gone through this in this course already with the Facebook case and Facebook selling that data. Facebook, Google, Amazon, right, are the three top companies who can collect this data, and then they sell that data to different companies to do their own data mining and to create ads and information about all of us. And so this issue will come up time and time again when we talk about ethical decision making. And the second bullet point here talks about here in 2014, where a law was introduced in the United States that would require car owners to control the data collected on the device called the event data recorder, commonly known as that black box, right? And so if you get into a car accident, very often the police or the FBI, whoever, can obtain that black box and hear what was going on in your car at any time when you were driving it. But now the law was introduced that only the owners have access to this information, and that it is up to the owners then to give this over to law enforcement or to insurance companies. So again, the privacy is going more and more back into the hands of the owner. Let's talk about some free speech issues, because this is a big topic when we talk about social media. So there's some ethical challenges here. They talk about two major examples. The first one here is somewhat minor, and the second one really has exploded in the last 2 years. So the first one says that here, Anthony Alanis was accused of threatening his estranged wife based on a series of Facebook posts. So he said he was emulating Eminem and some of his lyrics, but saying in his Facebook post that he was potentially going to harm his wife or kill his wife. But he said in his defense that he was just venting and that he really truly wasn't going to cause her any harm, but he was just doing what Eminem might have done in the song. But where do his rights end, and where do her rights begin, right? So I always think of this speech, right, that my rights end at the tip of your nose, right? So if I were to go to punch you in the nose, then my rights end when I actually do go to punch you. But if I don't, if I swing before I hit your nose, then I'm okay. And so, right, so he's saying these things, but she's feeling threatened. So now there is an ethical decision, and this is potentially a violation of free speech. This is the same idea that you can't scream fire in a crowded movie house because, okay, maybe that's the speech, something that you'd like to be saying, but it can cause harm to others. So this is where that would, that it hits your freedom ends at the tip of my nose. And so the second bullet point here talks about the old case, because this was one of the original ones, but it's come up so many times now since then, is the Facebook private page Anon was shut down after the Facebook group, after Facebook found that the group was violating the site's terms of service by posting racist and sexist comments anonymously. So they said that was not just, and that was harming society, right? But now, okay, yes, racist and sexist comments are not correct, but now we have gone further, right? So Facebook is continuously shutting down sites that that are anti-vaccine, that are pro-Trump, right? Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of these sites have decided that they have a right to shut down lots of different voices, right? And so there have been places like Parler and Patreon, different other websites that have said, we are not going to discriminate against these sites. But again, this issue is still being highly debated. because where do your rights end, right? Where is the tip of my nose? Looks like the automatic light behind me just went on. Great, let's go ahead and finish up this chapter. Next one is the government censorship of free speech. So before we were talking about censorship from Facebook, from Twitter. So these are individual organizations that are censoring pages. But what happens when the government censors free speech? And in the United States, for the most part, right now, that the government is limiting, in theory, their censorship. But there are some examples of non-democratic countries that are very clear where they're doing some severe censorship. So that's what these bullet points here say that in democratic countries, the role of government is more likely to look out for the public good and protect intellectual property, in theory. And in some non-democratic or authoritarian societies, governments have attempted to limit their citizens' access to the internet-based political security and religious grounds. So let's go through these examples, only because I think they're so interesting and really bring home this idea of censorship. So China, right? As you know, slowly but surely, China is shutting down more and more access to the West for their citizens. That I have a good friend, she teaches English on the internet to Chinese students, and very slowly they are transitioning those English teaching opportunities to animation, to computers, that the Chinese government can now control what it is that the Chinese students hear. They don't want to have the Chinese students have any access to Americans, to be able to see what's in their house, how they act, what they say, etc. So very quickly is China being more and more strict about who they have access to. And recently, this is in 2017, the book says that China really restricted a lot of their internet access to the West, and that affected over 700 million users, right? So that a lot of people not having access to ideas and thoughts from the West. Pakistan. This has to do with Islam. So the conservative Islamic groups are arresting people in Pakistan for posts that they make on social media that are not in line with their Islamic views, right? So again, that in theory does not happen here in the United States, that people are arrested because they post ideas against other types of religion. Iran, a really serious situation there too, right? Just like China, they are starting to block Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, because they, again, feel that these sites are coming from the West and they do not want their citizens having access to these ideas. Oppression, right, is the word that comes to mind, right? That the people are being oppressed and not having an opportunity for free speech. And the last one, North Korea. We don't hear a lot about what's happening in North Korea because the users, the people, do not have access to the internet. Only foreigners have access to use the internet. And so the citizens of North Korea cannot post anything to tell the rest of the world about what is actually happening in their country. Really, really, in my opinion, sad situation that, again, these people are being severely oppressed by their governments. So let's move on to some lighter topics. The impact of scientific breakthroughs. Here, there are four major profound impacts that are coming through from these scientific breakthroughs. The first one being genetically modified or engineered foods. Here, the bullet point says that it involves altering the natural makeup of a living organism and allowed scientists to insert virtually any gene into a plant and create a new crop or a new species. So this allows us to create more food faster. But at the same time, they say that this food, that these new genetically modified genes are making, that it could potentially be harmful to humans. And as you read, hopefully, in the book, that the EU has very quickly either stopped use of these types of foods, or they have made it mandatory that companies who use these type of foods put that information on their packaging. And a lot of organizations have stepped up and said that they're going to do that voluntarily. But here in the US, there's no true regulation about stating whether a food is using GMO, these processed foods, and that, as I said, could potentially be harmful to humans. Second example here is the sequencing of the human genome and the use of genetic information. This is the identification of human genes is critical to the early diagnosis of life-threatening diseases, the invention of new ways to prevent illnesses, and the development of drug therapies to treat a person's unique genetic profile. So this is identifying your DNA from your biometric data, maybe from a fingerprint or something, and then being able to say that you might be later in life prone to certain diseases, and you can start presenting those diseases now. But where this comes into an ethical decision is that, again, privacy. Who should have access to this information? Should insurance companies have access to this information because they might increase your insurance rates? Should employers have access to this information because then they might not hire you because you might have a heart issue down the line, etc. So really interesting questions as we have all of these scientific breakthroughs. The next two ones are also very interesting. The first one is stem cell research. So tissue engineering, and this offers the promise that failing human organs and anti-aging cells could be rejuvenated or replaced with healthy cells or tissues grown anew. Personally, I've had a lot of experience with this over the last few weeks. My husband was in the hospital for over 2 weeks doing a stem cell therapy for his myeloma. He is one of them, the last stages of the bone marrow cancer, and they found it very late. And so he had to do 5 or 6 months of chemotherapy, and then he was admitted to the hospital where they extracted for 3 days stem cells, cleaned them, and in that time gave him extensive chemotherapy drugs to drop his immune system down to almost zero and try and get all the cancer out. And then they put those stem cells back in. And the idea is that now, just like this bullet point says, those aging cells, those cancer cells, will be replaced with these healthy cells. And so we will see over the next couple of weeks, next couple of months, if that stem cell therapy will be helpful. The idea is that he will be able to be on less chemotherapy drugs for the rest of his life. I will keep you posted. And on to the last scientific breakthrough. This is where in pharmaceutical care and medicine, that it's occurring at an amazing rate. So there are two ideas here. That there's surgery using 3D glasses and video microscopes. So as you can see in this picture, right, there's a guy here, there's a doctor here with a 3D mask on, and he's using this to do his actual surgery. So as I said in the book, he doesn't have to use a small microscope or lean over in an uncomfortable or awkward position, but is able to stand up straight and truly see, like in an IMAX movie, what the situation is in the person's body. And it becomes much more efficient and much more productive and useful for surgeries. And then the last other medical breakthrough that they talk about is delivering blood for transfusions. Drones by Africa and Amazon has even gotten involved in that as well. And so then the last slide here just sums up what we've been talking throughout this chapter, is that there are controversies that will emerge over these scientific breakthroughs, right? How are we going to maximize the benefits to individuals and society, yet minimize or eliminate the negative consequences regarding these technological developments that must be continued to be addressed? And so that's why we discussed the ethical frameworks, so that when these ethical decisions come up, we have a way of breaking down the decision-making process and seeing if we can come up with the most ethical decision. Great. Again, I'm Professor Green, and this is the end of Chapter 11, The Role of Technology, and I look forward to seeing you in class.